Hello, everybody. Today, we're going to talk about the idea of an arched plate and a little bit about the origin of an arched instrument. So, first thing I'd like to say is that the violin probably is the most successful string musical instrument used in so many cultures all over the world. For lots and lots of different repertoire. And it's important to remember that a violin is not really a violin without a bow. So it's really two musical instruments conspiring in the player's hands to create a beautiful, expressive tone. We know that this has been a very popular instrument for, over 500 years. Invented in northern Italy by Andrea Amati about 1565 or so. And you're probably aware that nobody calls this an arched violin, okay? Because there never were flat violins. They were always like this. And in fact, modern violins, this one's about, 100 years old or so, are proportioned and built almost exactly the way they were 500 years ago. I was curious to know where the word archtop came from, because it doesn't appear in early literature. Certainly Orville Gibson, America's innovative builder who kind of got the archtop instrument rolling, the plucked archtop instrument rolling, never used the word archtop. I asked all my guitar maker friends, and everybody kind of scratched their heads. A few of them guessed, but nobody was confident. So I called my friend George Gruen, and he enlisted the help of Joe Spann in his employ. And Joe Spann did some research that, well, he's a lot better at this than I am. And he said he ran an every word search of the Music Trade Review and Presto magazine online articles from 1880 to 1954 and checked for the terms archtop as one word, archtop as two words, and arch-top without any results whatsoever. Isn't that interesting? So it wasn't used in those magazines over the entire period indicated, 75 years. And then he did a word search in newspapers.com online archives, which covers the entire US from the 1700s to the present day for these same terms, including the word guitar. All three variants appear first in newspapers around the country during the year 1932, with a wide variety of manufacturers listed and no particular emphasis on a specific manufacturer. The context of the use of this term is exclusively in music store ads for the first few years. And the Montgomery Ward catalog, which was the Amazon of its time, was the first to use the term arched top guitar in the fall-winter 1936 issue. Absolutely none, in bold letters, of the pre-war Gibson catalogs used the term archtop. Gibson was extremely consistent in the use of the terms graduated spruce top and carved top. So he concludes that the term archtop guitar originated during the Depression as a way for music store retailers and catalog companies to conveniently describe an entire category of guitars across a wide spectrum of manufacturers, and I would add manufacturing techniques. And he's the appraiser for George Gruen's company. Thank you very much, Joe. That's excellent. So we know that archtop is a marketing word, which is an interesting thing. In other words, Orville Gibson didn't use it. Lloyd Loar never heard the word archtop, never thought of the instruments that he was designing, either mandolins or guitars, as archtop instruments. So just an interesting thing. And I would suggest that maybe a better word for, if you're going to just pick a word to describe the shape of an archtop guitar, maybe the word dome would be better, because a dome is a 3D structure, whereas an arch is a 2D structure. Anyway, now we're going to have a quick look here at this lovely 250-year-old viola built in northern Italy by Guadagnini. And you can see this one is in unbelievably great condition for a 250-year-old instrument. A little wear, a little re-edging repairs on the lower bouts, but really in spectacular condition. And the reason I'm showing you this right now is to give you a little glimpse of the way the instrument is made. So over here we have a couple of maps with thicknesses, and they vary, the thicknesses vary on these instruments. On the back it's a little bit thicker in the center than at the edges. And you can see these are expressed in millimeters, so that's how that is. And then here on the top or front of the viola, it actually seems to be, well, it's not clear. We don't need to get into it, but it is quite thin in the center, and sometimes even thicker at the edge. So maybe not what we would expect, but at any rate, it's an old valuable instrument, and this is what he did to get the sound out of it. And then here you can see a couple of CT scans of the instrument showing the bass bar, the blocks, and other interior parts of the instrument. Again, very interesting that it's virtually as built without a whole lot of repair work done to it. And then finally, and most interesting for us, and to the point of this time, we're going to look at these cross-section CT scans. So this top one is across the upper bout, and you can see, some gradual arches, and pretty close to the same thickness all the way across. This varies a little tiny bit, 2.7 millimeters in the center, 3.1 at the edges. So as I said, slightly unusual, at least the way I understand it, that usually the plates on these instruments are a little thicker in the center, or this is not, the opposite way, in fact. You can see the single brace or bass bar, and then in the next image we can see this is across the top corners of the C bout, so you can see the little blocks in the corners there, and the bass bar getting thicker. The arch is more pronounced, partly because the instrument is narrower here. And you can see the nice even graduation, although it's a little thinner here than there. I'm not quite sure why that would be, but this is what the builder did. And then this is right across the narrowest part of the instrument in the center of the C bouts. And you can see the F-holes here. You can see the sides bowing out. Pretty interesting view of this instrument, again with a CT scan, so we're quite sure that this is an accurate section. We're seeing exactly what this person built. And then two more images of the lower bout across the corners and the lower bout across the widest part of the instrument. So at any rate, I'm using this as an example of a classical instrument that the builder manipulated the wood in such a way to carefully judge the shape or a model of the outside and inside of the plate, and then carefully adjusted the thicknesses to get the plate to respond in the way that he desired. Now, I'll point out that building an instrument like this is a great deal more work than building an instrument with flat pieces of wood, a whole different end of the pool so far as woodworking goes. Very demanding task. No woodworker thinks this is an easy thing to do. I don't care who you ask. It's challenging. But this tradition shows that this is a superior way to build this kind of instrument. And you have to wonder what would have happened if Andrea Amati had decided that guitar making was his thing. Would he have been the first archtop guitar maker instead of the first violin maker? Interesting question. So let's go back to this idea of the arch and the dome. So an arch is a two-dimensional curve, very useful for all kinds of things. We see it all over architecture. The Romans used a multitude of them to support aqueducts to deliver water to their cities. But as I said, more to the point, it's the dome structure that more closely resembles what's going on in the archtop guitar. And of course, a dome is a natural form that you can hardly miss as a human on the planet. So eggs and all kinds of things might remind you of this shape. An egg is a great example because of the incredible strength that the tiny amount of shell in the egg gives to this structure, or it's full of this giant glob of protein and other stuff, DNA. And this is a perfect package that resists cracking and breakage until it's broken from the inside. So the reason a dome is such a great structure, normally it's part of a sphere, a section of a sphere. So it could be like this one, about twice as big in diameter as it is tall, making it a hemisphere or half a sphere. But the dome and the arch transfer whatever load you put on the center of it all the way out to the edge, and it transfers all the loads in compression. Of course, this is a great way to use certain building materials. In architecture, stone, of course, is great in compression. It's very hard to break stone by squeezing it. It has a huge amount of strength in compression, and relieves the stone or whatever building material is used of any tensile stress. In other words, stretching. So none of the structure of, say, a dome or hemisphere is loaded in tension when we push on it. It's all in compression. When we press on it like this, some of that force, of course, is resolved in outward stresses on the edge of this, and I don't know if you can hear this, but this cool bowl is kind of moving, and you can sense that it's trying to push the outsides away. But because of the shape of it, it's hard to do because it's such a great structure. Humans have been using the dome as a shelter structure for, I just read, it's hard to date it, but somewhere between 12 and 20,000 years ago in the Ukraine, they found a dwelling that was made out of mammoth bones, I guess ribs that were already bent, and mud. So the dome is well known to us as a great structure for load bearing, and so we're happy to use it in instrument making. So just to give you, a little perspective on this, I carefully measured this. It's just slightly thinner than 15 thousandths of an inch, or 0.37 millimeters. Here's a piece that's almost exactly the same thickness, and this one. I mean, you can see if you're going to try and make something this strong that was rectangular, not domed, you would need to do some fancy something or other to get the same piece of material to anywhere near approximate the load bearing and load sharing structure of a dome. Okay, so why are we doing all this work? I'll quote my hero, Jimmy DeQuisto, who called the archtop guitar the universal guitar. And Jimmy thought that a properly built archtop was capable of playing any kind of music and satisfying any kind of guitar player. And he and I shared this idea, and I think it's completely right. I think that the structure, even though it's difficult to make and tricky to get it right, it's worth pursuing, and I think the Archtop has a huge amount of untapped potential that I'm trying to work on, trying to explore that road. Here is the latest guitar from my shop, and this is this is a lively and powerful instrument. A lot of fun to play. It's lightweight, weighing at 3.9 pounds or 1.77 kilograms. A nice light instrument that's capable of moving a lot of air, and that, after all, is our goal. We're trying to move air. And the biggest part of the long equation of events that makes an Archtop guitar are the plates, the top and the back. And so I think that the top and the back should be quite a bit thinner than is usually done. And that's because of this benefit that we have from the domed structure of the wood. And in order to get these plates to be the right shape and the right thickness so that they're properly flexible and lively when you play the guitar, to get that is a pretty complicated series of decisions. So first we have the material, then there's the modeling of the plate. That is the specific way you make a dome and a recurve on the plate in order to promote this healthy consonant vibration that we want. And finally, the thickness of the plate, which, as we've talked about before, is very sensitive adjustment because the stiffness of a piece of material varies with the cube of its thickness. So I'm going to try and show you how this goes together. Here's a nice top, about 25 millimeters or an inch thick. Here's something like what will be left when we're all done. So 90% of this material is going to go in the trash can. So this part only weighs about 10% of the part we're starting with. And it's a funny amount of material. It's not so much work, but there's a lot of chips if you're doing them by hand to get from here to here. And I know it's really tempting to think, well, we can use a machine for that. We can use these various methods of carving with power tools to try and get to that shape in an efficient way. I don't have any quarrel with that kind of thinking, but I would like to suggest that a great deal is learned, both as a craftsperson and as a student of wood. A great deal is learned as you take off the wood chip by chip to try and create a properly flexible plate. So what we're going to do is we're going to introduce and explore the world of hand tools as they apply to creating this sculpted surface. And I'm going to walk you through this step by step. One of the most important things about this method of building an archtop is supporting the top after the outside is carved. So typically what we do is we carve the outside of the instrument first and get the model the way we want, and make sure that this looks like it's going to be correct in terms of distributing the force where it needs to be distributed and being flexible where it needs to be flexible. And then we flip it over, and this is a flat surface in here, so we have a tremendous amount of work to do to get this down to thickness here in the center, and to make sure that the thicknesses are under control and relatively even, with a slight thinning in certain areas that we decide to make a little bit more flexible. So in order to do that, since we're going to end up with a very flexible piece of material, right, we need to have some kind of work holding device that will support this while we're working on it with various hand tools. So we need to be able to lean on the wood and have it not split or crack while we're doing that. And so we'll be working on creating a tool, a nest to put the inverted top on, so that we can confidently graduate the thickness of the inside and reduce the thickness to optimal. And that's the job of making a plate.